Lesson 1. Priming. Exposure to a stimulus influences your response to a later stimulus. For example, have a look at this image. Now quickly fill in the missing letters of the word. Did you think soap? The image of the bathroom primed your brain, so soap came more easily to mind than soup would have. However, if you saw an image of a restaurant, you probably would have said soup. We can make use of priming in our daily lives. You could prime yourself for having a good day by smiling, or watching a video of Bob Ross wishing you a fantastic day. The second lesson is cognitive ease. This is how easily our brains can process information. It ranges between ease and strained. When you are in a state of cognitive ease, you're probably in a good mood, trust your intuitions, and casual in your thinking. But when you feel cognitively strained, you will invest more effort in what you're doing, you'll feel less comfortable, and make fewer errors, but you'll be less creative. So how can you use this to your advantage? Well, let's suppose you want to send an email to your parents and help them believe that you really did get good grades. Look at the written statements below. Your parents will be more likely to believe you got a B+. This is because the first reduces cognitive strain by making it easier to read. The less cognitive strain a person has to face, the more likely they are to accept ideas without thinking. The third lesson is the straw man fallacy, substituting the original argument for an easier one. This is happening constantly in the current presidential debates. At the beginning of the second debate, a woman named Patrice Brooke mentions Hillary's MA-rated behaviour from the previous debate. So she asks Hillary Clinton, "Do you feel you are modelling appropriate and positive behaviour for today's youth?" Hillary responds with unrelated stuff about political beliefs and income equality. She says, "I want us to heal our country and bring it together, because that's, I think, the best way for us to get the future that our children and grandchildren deserve." Now, do you see what's happened here? Hillary basically dodged the original question by substituting the original argument with, "How will you help create a positive future for our children?" Moving on to lesson 4, the law of small numbers. This is a bias to believe the characteristics of a sample population can be estimated from a small number of observations or data points. Let's say I flip a coin 10 times, twice. H is for heads and T is for tails. Now take a look at the results for each session. Are the sequences equally likely? On the surface it appears the first is much more likely than the second, but that's false. Each of the individual coin flips have an equal chance of being flipped. Your brain can mislead you because it's a pattern-seeking machine. Mutual fund companies can exploit this bias by presenting their 10-year streak of high returns to clients, framing it as their expertise instead of luck. Their 10-year streak can be likened to flipping 10 tails in a row. It appears amazing, but the chances of a 10-year streak of low returns is equally likely. Lesson 5. Anchoring. When people consider a particular value of an unknown quantity before estimating that quantity, estimates stay close to the number that people first considered. So Daniel says, if you consider how much you should pay for a house, you will be influenced by the asking price. I wanted to sell my motorbike for $1,500. When I put it up for sale, I set the price at $2,100 and marked it down to $1,800. I knew potential buyers would negotiate down the price, so by anchoring them to $2,100, it became much more likely I'd get $1,800, or at least $1,500. If I put it up for $1,500 straight away, buyers would likely offer less because they'd be anchored to $1,500 instead of $2,100. Lesson 6. The availability heuristic. This is a mental shortcut that relies on examples that immediately come to a person's mind. The fallacy is that if something can be recalled, it must be important. Here's an example. Because of the coincidence of 2 planes crashing last month, Helen now prefers to take the train. But that's silly. In reality, the risk hasn't changed. Plane crashes just happen to be in the forefront of her mind, so she's more sensitive to danger. The 7th lesson is the availability cascade. This is a self-sustaining chain of events which may start from media reports of a minor event and lead up to public panic and large-scale government action. On some occasions, a media story about a risk catches the attention of a segment of the public which becomes aroused and worried about. This emotional reaction becomes a story in itself, prompting additional coverage in the media, which in turn produces greater concern and involvement. The cycle is sometimes sped along deliberately by availability entrepreneurs, individuals or organizations who work to ensure a continuous flow of worrying news. The danger is increasingly exaggerated as the media compete for attention-grabbing headlines. Because your attention means more profit from advertisements. Lesson 8. The sunk cost fallacy. This is my favorite one. You reason that further investment is a good decision based on the fact that the resources you've already invested will be lost otherwise, not taking into consideration the overall losses that would occur if you continued to invest. You probably see this fallacy all the time without realizing. So for example, George and Sally plan to see Finding Dory at the movies. Halfway through the movie, they discover that it's a boring movie. They decide to stay for the rest of the movie because they had already invested $10 into buying movie tickets, and they drove their car all the way to the movies. But George and Sally failed to realize that instead of spending another hour watching a movie they hate, they could just walk out the cinema and do something they love. I caught myself committing the sunk cost fallacy halfway through my university education. I was exactly halfway through a course that I hated. If I wasn't aware of this fallacy, I would have continued to do something I hate purely because I had already invested 1.5 years of my time and money into it. The 9th lesson is prospect theory and loss aversion. Which do you choose? A. Get $900 for sure, or B. 90% chance to get $1,000. Now which do you choose? A. Lose $900 for sure, or B. 90% chance to lose $1,000. Prospect theory states that people make decisions based on the potential value of losses and gains rather than the final outcome. In the first problem, you likely chose A, but in the second, you probably chose B like I did, even though both problems are essentially identical. Most of us are loss averse. We are more sensitive to losses and negativity than gains and positivity. You'll probably be 2 times happier winning $100, but 4 times sadder losing $100. This concept explains why the news on TV is mostly negative. It's why businesses offer 30-day money-back guarantees. And it's also why insurance companies are profitable. 10 people may pay $100 of health insurance to cover a medical emergency that would cost $1,000, but the likelihood of that happening may be 1 in 20. So theoretically, if 20 people paid $100, the insurance company would make $2,000 and only lose $1,000, leaving them with $1,000 profit. Lesson 10. The Endowment Effect. People value things more simply because they own them. Back in school as a kid, I used to own a Yu-Gi-Oh trading card called Blue Eyes White Dragon, and to any kid, a Blue Eyes White Dragon was like owning $1,000. There is no way in hell I would have ever traded my Blue Eyes for 5 Red Eyes Black Dragons, even though they were worth more. Taking this lesson into the real world, perhaps you're selling your car. You've probably priced it too high simply because it's your own. I've found the best way to mitigate the endowment effect is to ask yourself what you'd tell someone else to sell it for. When your own money isn't on the line, you're less susceptible to emotional filters and cognitive biases, just like when you used to splurge mum's money at the supermarket on the most expensive lollies, but you didn't with your own pocket money. The final lesson is duration neglect and the peak end rule. This is probably one of the most useful lessons I got from the book. So duration neglect says that people's judgments of painful experiences depend very little on how long those experiences lasted. And the peak end rule says that people judge an experience mostly on how they felt at its peak or the end. So a 10-year relationship may have ended badly for you. What a waste of 10 years, you might say. But the fact that it ended badly doesn't mean the time spent in the relationship was a complete waste. You may have had 9 years of happiness and 1 year of unhappiness. Let's review the 11 lessons we covered in this video. Priming, cognitive ease, straw man fallacy, the law of small numbers, anchoring, the availability heuristic, the availability cascade, the sunk cost fallacy, prospect theory and loss aversion, the endowment effect, and finally, duration neglect and the peak end rule. Thank you very much for watching guys, and I hope you learned something new.